Hi, GERO 508. Today is Sunday, July 14th, and we're getting to the fun part of the class. So you've done a really good job of learning all the neurobiology, learning about the mind-body connection, learning about the importance of the gut microbiome. And now we're going to talk about interventions. And I think this is my favorite part of the class because it's very practical, it's very applied, it's what you can do in your own life. It's what you can help your family and your friends and your patients and just people that you encounter that are struggling. These are all very useful tools that we can all use. And we all kind of have our little bag of stress that we carry around with us. And for every person, it's going to be something different. You know, for me, I'm a cancer patient, so my health is an issue. We always have family stress. I worry about my kids. I worry my brother-in-law is going through a tough time right now, so I worry about him. We all have work or school stress. There's no perfect life where everything is easy. I'm sure even Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have stress in spite of being billionaires. And so the important thing to realize is that we want to have a healthy amount of stress in our lives. We don't want to just be, snails sitting out on the pavement. We want to have a healthy amount of stress. We want to understand that not all stress is bad. And we want to understand how to manage our stress and be healthy. And I think that is, like I said, something that we can all benefit from. So speaking of stress, your midterm is Monday, which is tomorrow. We have it open all day. So it opens at midnight and it closes at 11:59 p.m. If you get OSAS accommodations because you have a mental or physical health issue, you can send me your email and send me your letter and I will set up your accommodations. If you have any questions, I did send out a study guide to help you review. You should go back through your quiz questions because we do reuse some of the quiz questions. You can take the quizzes as often as you want and the highest score counts. So if you want to go back in and take your quizzes again just to rifle through. And I think I also sent out directions on how to access your quiz grades. If not, it should be on the Brightspace Tips PowerPoint, or you can always email me or text me. Okay, so let's get rolling. We're going to go into Module 8, and we're talking stress intervention sociality. And I want to just quickly mention you have your quiz. We're allowing you to do the quizzes until the end of the semester, but I think it's really helpful to stay on track so that you don't have a big deadline at the end. The discussions do close every week, and in order to get full points, you post your response to the prompt, and then you reply to 3 or more of your classmates to get full points. And if you haven't been getting full points, John's really good about giving you feedback and telling you, hey, this is why you didn't. So we're talking about loneliness and sociality, kind of two sides of the same coin. And the prompt for the discussion is to think about your own experience with witnessing or experiencing loneliness. It might be loneliness in someone else. It might be your own loneliness. We all went through that during the pandemic. And talk about how did it play out? What impact did it have on the person's psychological or physical health? And what happened, in the end to that person? One of the interesting statistics I read today is that although older people have a high rate of isolation, young people are actually experiencing a higher rate of loneliness. And so I think it's important when we talk about social connection and loneliness, being alone by itself does not have a damaging effect on your health. It's how you perceive it. Do you feel lonely? Do you feel disconnected or unconnected to others? So don't freak out if you're like me and you're an introvert and you're perfectly happy sitting on the couch with your dog reading a book or cooking, or gardening or whatever. It's okay to be alone. It's how you feel about it and how you perceive it that creates stress and creates negative health effects. Okay, so I have a PowerPoint. Let's see if I can bring that up. So John's usually here being my audiovisual tech, so I'm going to hopefully do this okay by myself. So again, we're talking about sociality and loneliness, and I just wanted to start by giving you, since we're a little bit more than halfway through the course, what's the roadmap going forward? We're going to talk about these individual interventions. So we're going to talk about music. We're going to talk about exercise. We're going to talk about social connection. We're going to talk about meditation. We're going to talk about gratitude. And you'll notice there's a lot of overlap. You know, when you meditate, that's also a form of exercise. It can be, depending on how you approach it. Sometimes you might be meditating in yoga class, so you're with other people and you're socially connected. Music, of course, people go out dancing, people listen to music, people talk to their friends about music, you go to concerts. There's a lot of social connection with music. Both of my sons have been musicians their whole lives, and they've been active in music groups and played music with others. And I think when my son was a freshman at USC and he was in the marching band, it was a really cool thing that although he was taking a really demanding course load, there were certain hours that he had to go to practice and physically exercise while playing his instrument, laughing and being around other people. So there's a lot of overlap among these different types of interventions. And the other thing I'd like to point out is what works for me may not work for you. Exercise works for me. Social connection works for me. I do a little bit of meditation. Sometimes in my life, I've done more. Gratitude works for me. Actually, they all work for me. Music works for me. But I'm probably more inclined to, do my daily walk with the dog and spend time in nature. And so you're going to find different things are going to work best for different people. Okay, so we see a lot of literature about the negative health effects of loneliness and isolation. And again, being alone isn't necessarily bad. It's how you perceive it and how you feel. So loneliness is really, I think, the mental and physical health focus. But we see that loneliness is as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's a lot. That's a really shocking number. Depression is very high among people who lack social connection. You have a higher risk of dementia. And we'll talk a little bit today about what are the factors that we need to look at that impact a lack of social connection and an increase in loneliness. And it's being older, having chronic health problems, so you're less mobile, you're less able to get out and see people, not having contact with your family, having low income. Rich people get better stuff. So if you have a ton of money, you're going on vacations, you're going out to restaurants, you hire people to come into your home to clean and cook and do your yard, and you have this staff of people that are helping support you. So yeah, when you're rich, you get more social interaction. Possibly. And changing family structures. We have a lot more single family households. We have a lot more divorce in the US. A lot more people are not having children. And so our families are kind of shrinking in some ways. That changing family structure, and you might have family issues from a marriage, divorce, remarriage, more kids, complicated family structures that impact how close people are. And so we will also talk about ways that we should be focusing on improving social connection, particularly for seniors, but really for everybody. And, helping seniors be integrated into their communities, having age-friendly communities, using technology. I'm a big fan of tech. And remember, I'm in my 60s, John's in his 60s. I love tech. I love computers. I love my iPhone. So in 10 or 15 years, yeah, I'll be using FaceTime to talk to my kids when they're not living in my house with me still, or maybe they still will be living in my house, and that's cool too. Having access to transportation. I've already found at my age that I don't really like to drive at night. So I have a friend out in Upland I want to go visit, and I said to her, hey, can we do it, like a brunch or a lunch thing? Because I don't want to have to drive home from Upland, which is really far from my house, late at night. So transportation is going to help older people and everybody be more socially engaged. So one of the things I want to go over was the Surgeon General's report that came out in May of 2023. And the Surgeon General, it's a fabulous report. It's 80 some pages long. So I don't expect you to read that whole report, but it's a resource for you if this is something that you want to dive deeper into. We've attached, I think it's the CNN article, to give you kind of the 80,000 feet view of what the Surgeon General said. And I'm going to go through some of the figures from that document just to help explain what we need to know about loneliness and lack of social connection. Okay. So here's the cover, our epidemic of loneliness and isolation, and it's focusing on the United States. But a lot of the things that we talk about apply no matter what country you live in or what country your family lives in. And so I think we need to, definitely keep our eyes open to the fact that this isn't just a U.S. issue. So one of the first figures on the right shows how social connection influences health. So you've got the biological component. So if I spend time on my couch petting my dog, I'm going to release oxytocin, my stress hormones are going to go down, my blood sugar is going to go down, my inflammation is going to go down, my immune system is going to be stimulated, so my gene expression for my immune system is going to increase, and I'm less likely to get sick because of my dogs. I hope, anyway. Psychological, we have meaning and purpose. I do volunteer work, so that gives purpose to my life. I'm engaging with other people and I'm identifying with people in my community that I can help. So that relieves my stress. It also gives us a sense of resilience. We can have, through social connection, we can have a sense that, hey, I've got your back, you've got my back. If I need help, you're there for me. And you can share when you're having a rough time, you can share it with others. And it gives you just a more positive outlook. And then, of course, social connection. John and I walk every day. We walk our dogs anywhere from 3 to 5 miles. And we do it, really, the dogs need to be walked. But we need to be walked too. So we're getting as much benefit out of it as our dogs are. And we talk, we laugh at the dogs. It's a little bit of forest bathing because we're walking through an area with a lot of wildlife. So we're looking at the bunnies and the squirrels, and we saw a golden eagle recently, lots of birds. So lots of interesting wildlife and smells. And so it's got that forest bathing feel to it, which is another way of, spending time in nature is another way of reducing stress. So that social connection of having a buddy that you go to the gym with, or a buddy that you walk with, or a buddy that you do yoga with is really helpful to increase your level of physical activity. Eating. So what do we see with older people who are isolated and lonely? They tend to not try as hard to have nutritional, well-balanced meals. Well, since the pandemic happened and both of my sons graduated from college, they've moved back home. So I have a little bit in the back of my mind every day, okay, what healthy foods am I going to make for dinner? I always say, eat the rainbow. So we try to have something really nutritious every night. So we all sit together as a family and we get that social connection, good food, good meal, good conversation. Sleep. Social connection, again, when you're younger, it can keep you out all night. But when you're older, if you're having sleep problems, you talk to your friends. How are you dealing with this? Being out and active means that you're not at home taking naps during the day. So you're out and active, then you come home, and when it's an appropriate time of day, you go to sleep. Social connection with smoking, I think, can cut one of two ways. If your friends are smokers, you might be more likely to be a smoker. But if you're in general in California, a lot of people don't smoke, and you can't smoke in restaurants, you can't smoke at work. So that will decrease your ability to find time to smoke. So there's a lot of different things that impact, in different ways that social connection influences our physical and mental health. Okay. So one of the things that I thought was interesting in the Surgeon General's report was talking about what are the ways that we can promote and advance social connection. So their graphic is the 6 pillars to advance social connection. So increasing infrastructure in local communities. You might think if someone's socially isolated, oh well, it's just them. Maybe they don't try very hard, or maybe they're introverted, or maybe they're just not very nice, or something like that. But we can create opportunities within our communities to make it easier for people to be socially connected. A good example is assisted living. So my aunt, who was very active and socially engaged at work, but she was a little bit of an introvert outside of work. So she had purposeful engagement at work. People would go out to lunch together. And she'd worked at her job for a long time. She developed early onset dementia. She had a mild seizure disorder. She couldn't drive anymore. So then she, was forced into early retirement, went home, and basically she had a dog. She didn't leave her house. At a certain point, she couldn't live by herself anymore as her condition worsened. So we, as a family, we came together. What's the best thing for Karen? What do we do? And we moved her into an assisted living facility that was relatively close to my mom's house. So she had family nearby. And it was the best thing that ever happened to her. It was a little bit like living in a college dorm, community meals. She became very active as a younger person in this community. She became very active right away. She was on the welcoming committee. She was on the newsletter committee. And she would go around and deliver, because physically she was still in really good shape. She would go around and deliver the newsletters to the different residents and check on people. And she developed a group of friends right away. It was the happiest she had been in years. And so having that sort of infrastructure to promote engagement and activities is really important. The second pillar is enacting pro-connection public policies. We want to avoid isolating people. We want to avoid othering people and discriminating against people. So I think there's a lot of leadership behind promoting policies that, hey, we have more in common than we have differences. And I think that's one way that government can get involved. Mobilizing the health sector. So one of the big questions has been, and I think health providers have started to get on the program with this, but the reality is for older Americans, unless Medicare pays a health provider to do something, they may not do it. So as an example, a few years ago, Medicare legalized or passed into the Medicare provisions that doctors would get paid to have discussions with patients about advanced directives and end-of-life care. And so we're starting to see, it's taken a few years and the word has to get out, but we're starting to see more doctors do that because they can bill for it. So if we allow doctors to bill for doing a loneliness screen, and we train healthcare providers to do a loneliness screen and assess social connection among patients, then we're going to see more providers being more aware of it and patients getting educated. And, a lot of times when we're looking at health issues, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Is the person sad because they're sick, or are they sick because they're sad and lonely? So number 4 is reforming digital environments, having safety standards, having pro-connection technologies. And that can be anything from making sure people have good internet access and Wi-Fi, making sure that there's a debate about whether we need to dumb down technology for older people. I personally think no, but for some older people, my brother-in-law is 71, my sister is 66 or something like that. They are terrible at using iPhones or computers. And so for them, yeah, an easier tool is a good idea. Number 5 is deepen our knowledge. So let's have a national research agenda focused on social connection. When we see the public health implications of being lonely, it's worth investing some time and money and energy into that. And then building a culture of connection. John and I have had the opportunity this summer to travel to Costa Rica with our Maymester class, and then we traveled to Canada to film a documentary for the Canadian version of the BBC. What we noticed in both places is the people are really nice. The people are very accepting. The people are very kind. They're very generous with their time. They're very tolerant of tourists that don't know what they're doing. We need to model that type of behavior and make that type of behavior our culture in the US and around the world. And it's Pride Month. It was Pride Month when we were up in Canada, and I was really struck by all the LGBTQ people that I saw walking around, very relaxed, very happy, very confident. And I don't see that in my community in Orange County. So having that culture of acceptance and kindness and respect will go a long way towards eliminating or decreasing isolation and loneliness. Okay, so I thought this was a really interesting graphic. So the national trends for social connection between 2003 and 2020. So 2020, remember, is the beginning of the pandemic. So we can expect that these trends for social connection in some ways got worse during the pandemic, depending on who you were. So, my kids moved home because of the pandemic. The dorms shut down. My son was a freshman at USC. So as a family, we probably became closer because we had our little bubble, and my son's girlfriend was included in our bubble, but not a lot of other people were in our bubble. So some social connections got better, some got worse. There are people that we couldn't see because they didn't believe in being careful, and I was really high risk. So it would be interesting to see these trends if we pulled them through, say, 2022 or 2023. But anyway, what they're seeing is a decrease in the level of social connection in every single category they looked at from 2003 to 2020. So social networks are getting smaller. So your number of friends and family getting smaller. Social participation is decreasing. The number of close friendships is decreasing. And we'll talk later, it's not that important how many friends you have. It's do you have close friends? So if you have one or two close friends, you're fine. If you have one close friend, you're probably fine. So it's not a competition to see, oh, I have 50 close friends, I have 8,000 friends on Facebook or whatever. The single person households are increasing. It's 29% of all households. So those are people that are a little bit isolated because they're living alone. And we're seeing a lot more single parent households too. Single parents tend to be isolated because they're trying to hold down the fort, and they're working and taking care of their kids, and it's a lot on one person's plate. So they don't have a ton of free time to go exercise or join clubs or volunteer in the community or socially engage and go out with their friends or whatever. So we're also seeing a decrease in community engagement and membership in community organizations, whether that's, I'm trying to think, like, not Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts because that's younger people, but churches, volunteer organizations. So we're seeing decreased levels of that as well. So less social engagement in your community. Okay. So this is a graphic from the same document from the Surgeon General, talks about the relative risk of a lack of social connection versus other things that we know, that we understand intuitively are dangerous and bad for you. And what the graph shows is when we compare mortality odds, lacking social connection comes out on top. Smoking 15 cigarettes a day comes out second. Drinking 6 alcoholic drinks a day comes out third. Physical activity and inactivity comes out next. Obesity, and then air pollution. So we talk a lot about, oh, you should exercise. We talk a lot about, oh, you shouldn't be overweight. We talk a lot about drinking in moderation. 1 drink a day for women, 2 drinks a day for men. And we all know that smoking's bad. But we don't talk that much from a public health standpoint about the lack of social connection and the really significant effect that has on health. So the data is definitely starting to come in. Okay, so here's something from the CDC, also talking about health risks of social isolation and loneliness. So increases your risk for heart disease and stroke, increases your risk for type 2 diabetes, increases your risk for depression and anxiety, increases your risk for addiction, whether it's alcohol or drugs, increases your risk for suicide or self-harm, increases your risk of dementia, increases your risk of earlier death. And then I think what gives us a little bit of a perspective on where we may need to focus our public health and our health efforts initially is who are the people that are most impacted? Low-income people. So I'm a low-income person. I'm, living in my studio apartment, or I'm renting a room in a house, and the person doesn't like me, so I have to stay in my room with the door closed. I don't have the money to go out, even to McDonald's. I'm working 2 jobs. I'm working 80 hours a week to try to make ends meet. I don't have time to socialize. So that can be really, really difficult. Young adults. It's a really hard time, I think, for a lot of young adults. There's a couple transition period. You go from high school to college, and that first semester when you go to college is really difficult. And a lot of people feel the same way. I'm not meeting people. I'm not making friends. I don't know what's wrong with me. If you transfer colleges, same deal. When you're a master's student, same deal. You start your master's program and you're thinking, hey, you probably look around and you think, oh, everyone else seems to know somebody except for me. And the other transition period is when you graduate. So now you graduate, you're either looking for a job or you're starting a job. Your job can become your social circle, and for a lot of adults, after their education's finished, their social circle will be work until they retire. However, that first initial period when you're transitioning from undergraduate, graduate, or graduate school to work and making your work friends can be difficult. And you may go to work somewhere where you just don't have anything in common with the other people. Maybe they're a lot older than you, or maybe they're just a lot different than you, and you don't want to hang out with them outside of work. That's okay. Older adults. So we know older adults are at risk for loneliness because they may be physically unable to get out and do things. Older adults also tend to be lower income. They more and more tend to be living alone. And may have outlived their other family members. Adults living alone can be at higher risk for loneliness. People with chronic diseases and disabilities. When you have a chronic disease, sometimes it's all you can do to get up, take a shower, get dressed, go to work if you have to go to work, get to the grocery store and get the basic, essentials that you need. So people that are dealing with chronic diseases and disabilities don't have a lot of bandwidth to go out and try to create opportunities for social connection. Immigrants, you come to a new country, you don't speak the language, you don't really understand the culture, you're homesick, you miss your food, your people, your religion, your music, and you feel I don't want to say unappreciated, doesn't really take it all up, but you feel like, hey, people are giving me side eye, people are looking at me weird because I'm different, and maybe I don't speak English that well or at all. And so immigrants can be very isolated, and particularly in the US, it can be difficult to navigate the education system, the health system, a lot of different things, and to navigate our system of laws when you are not from this country and didn't grow up speaking English. And then, of course, people who are LGBTQ plus can be isolated. They are more likely to be living alone. They're more likely to not have children, probably more likely to not be married, and probably more likely to have not great relationships with their family members if they're struggling with their family members accepting them for who they are. And so we know that each one of these groups I just talked about are going to be impacted by loneliness a little bit more. So if you are a healthcare provider, if you are the administrator of a nursing home or an assisted living facility, you're going to want to keep your eyes and ears open to see, hey, how is Mrs. Brown, who just moved in, and she's got renal failure and has to go to get dialysis a couple times a week. Is she able to do any of the activities? How can we incorporate her? How can we get her engaged into our community? Okay, So what are the factors that shape social connection? Again, I think there's this misperception that, oh, it's all up to the individual. So, oh, you're just not trying very hard. You're not very likable. You're not very outgoing. You're not very engaging. And there's so many other things that we have to really look at. And to solve the problem, we've got to look at the individual. We've got to look at, what do relationships look like in our society and in our culture? We've got to look at the community and what opportunities there are for social connection. And we've got to look at our society as a whole. One of the things I talk about in our class about Costa Rica, we're looking at longevity and health in Costa Rica in our Maymester class. And we talk about the fact that even though Costa Rica is a very religious society, they were on the forefront in Central and South America in terms of recognizing gay and legalizing gay marriage, banning discrimination, allowing people to change their driver's licenses to reflect their identities, etc. And so we see a society where people really care about each other, and they have a very, very strong feeling of community and togetherness and caring about each other, so that, they're going to say, hey, we don't want to hurt people in our community. And so I think we need to look at all these factors. What are the things that might make an individual at risk? How are the relationships in our society and culture in our country changing? What are the opportunities in our community? Do we have outdoor space in parks? Do we have intergenerational, multi-generational housing? One of the things that they talked about is having housing, and I think this would be a brilliant thing to link up older adults who are retired and isolated to younger people that have kids that are struggling to find childcare. Put them together in the same community, and then you have these older adults that just desperately want to be grandma and grandpa to somebody, and you have younger people that desperately just want to go take a shower and not have kids hanging on them, and you could really make something beautiful. Okay, so I want to talk about the Harvard Grant and Gluck studies. This is a study that started back in 1939, and they had two studies that ran in parallel. They wanted to look at the highly educated, high income, high socioeconomic class of Harvard students. And in 1939 to 1944, we're talking all men in both studies. That changed later in the studies, but we're talking Harvard students from the classes of 1939 to 1944, basically think high wealth white men. And then we're talking inner city men from low socioeconomic families, still predominantly white, okay? So that's one of the weaknesses of the study is Boston didn't really get to start showing very much diversity until probably the 1980s or 1990s, and this study had been going on for a long time. One of the most important things that we can learn from both of these studies is that relationships were important, but quality mattered more than quantity. So it's the quality of your relationship. Is it a positive relationship? Does this person support you? Do you feel close? Do you trust each other? Not so much as, hey, I have 20 friends, So don't worry if, particularly post-pandemic, or if you're going through a little dry spell and you don't have a ton of friends right now. Okay. The IBM study is interesting because they kind of go through from an IBM corporate perspective what it is that we should be worried about and looking at in terms of connection. And of course, one of the proposals that they're going to have, because they're IBM, is using technology and making sure the technology works for people. But I like the way they break down in this figure, they break down the 4 areas impacted by loneliness in older adults. So it's the individual. So I'm getting older, I have physical issues, I might have cognitive risks, they decrease my quality of life, it's harder for me to get out and do things, it's harder for me to drive, I may be fatigued or sick, and I don't get out much. It's caregivers are impacted. So one of the things that I think Kate Wilbur has a new grant in our School of Gerontology, looking at ways that we can support caregivers that will decrease elder abuse. So it doesn't matter if you're in the US or another country, caregivers, especially caregivers for people with dementia, have a tremendous amount of stress and a tremendous burden placed on them to provide support to older adults. And, as time goes on, we're going to have more and more older adults. We're going to have fewer and fewer young people that can act as caregivers. Our family size tends to get smaller in developed countries over the last, say, 60 years. And so we're seeing these caregivers sandwiched between caring for their parents or their older relatives, caring for their children, working full time. It's a very, very stressful situation. So we're going to see a lot of caregiver stress, caregiver loneliness. I'm a big, huge believer in caregiver support groups where you can share with each other, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. How do you approach this? And everybody understands who you are. The medical system's stressed because we have more and more older people, more and more people. I've read stories from doctors who say that I have patients that are frequent flyers and they're in all the time. And it's basically because it gives them something to do and they're lonely and they want someone to talk to. And when you go to a doctor appointment, you get 15 or 20 minutes with a doctor and maybe a little more time with a nurse or a nurse practitioner to talk to them about your life and what's going on. And they're nice. So we're seeing more burden on the medical system. And then we see this public societal area. And again, we see a lot of ageism in the media. We see, unfortunately, I think in the US, we're probably worse than many countries in the world in terms of treating older adults as if, hey, you should be seen and not heard. You should stay home, get out of my way, boomer. And really not lifting older people up and praising them for their wisdom and their experience and what they bring to the table. Okay, so the other thing that the IBM study talked about is what are the triggers for loss that leads to loneliness in adults, and they talked about individual triggers and societal triggers. So individual triggers, getting older, physical and cognitive ability declines. Let's say you have, I have a friend that has early onset dementia and she's doing pretty well. However, I know it's harder for her. She can't drive anymore. So it's harder for her to get out and see people. She's still able to use, text messaging and Facebook, but at some point that's going to get really hard for her too. So her level of isolation is going to decrease. And so luckily we have a core group of friends that we've known each other since we were in law school together, and we can support her. You might have loss in your family and friends. John's mom lived to be 95. She outlived most of her family and all of her friends. So she was very methodical. As someone who was approaching her 90s, she went out and made friends with people who were in their 70s. And she had a strong social group associated with the church that she went to. And they would go to lunch and they would go to events and they would do things together. And then your professional identity. One of the things that I am adamantly opposed to is people working 100% on Friday and retiring and working 0% on Monday. This can be very, very difficult. If your social life is work, if you're used to, I go to work and I have my friends at work and I hang out and talk to them, and then I go home at night and I'm tired, so I make myself dinner and I go to bed and I don't really engage or have hobbies outside of work. This can especially be a problem for people who are very driven. It can be a problem for men. It can be a huge loss of identity when you go from working 100% time to working 0% time. I like the idea that the Stanford Longevity Project has put out there to say, hey, we should be tapering off work, go from 100% one year to 80% the next year to 60%, 40%, phase in your retirement over a few years. Now, what are the societal triggers? How you're treated in the media and in the market. You're treated in the media as, you're an old fogey and you don't know any better. I was kind of shocked and irritated to find that some of the schools in my area do dress up like an old person day. And of course, they all wear glasses and have a cane and gray hair. And it's just kind of like, really? Are you really going to mock old people and teach your students to do that? Maybe my sense of humor is disappearing. I don't know. Not having a purpose in life. So if you're used to working or you're used to raising your children and that goes away, maybe you're used to being an athlete and you can't do the things that you used to do as an athlete anymore. And you need to find things to replace that purpose. So if your purpose isn't working anymore, then your purpose can be, hey, I'm going to rescue dogs, or I'm going to volunteer at my local elementary school and read books to the kindergartners. Or I have a neighbor who's retired who just became a master gardener, and she volunteers and offers her master gardener, she's a highly qualified, highly educated gardener. She offers those skills to people in the community who need that. Value to society. We have a bad habit in America of thinking that for a woman, if you're over like 12, you have no value to society anymore. Men tend to hang on a little bit longer, but by the time, in the tech industry, if you're over 30, you're old. In the regular world, if you're over 50, you're considered kind of old. And in academics, we're pretty lucky, John and I, to be in academics, because in academics, people work forever. It's more common that people work until they die than it is that people retire and go off. But not having value, not having purpose is a really big trigger to being isolated and being lonely, feeling lonely. Okay. So one of the things that the IBM study looked at is, what are our challenges? What are our obstacles to solving this problem of loneliness and a lack of social connection? So we don't really have good screening practices. To me, that's easy. We can, UCLA has a loneliness screen. I think it's a little bit long and complicated, but we need to come up with something that's a 3 to 5 question screen. And I've noticed when I go to see doctors, because unfortunately, because of my cancer diagnosis, I have doctors that I have to go see, that the nurses have been trained now to ask you a few questions to screen for depression. We could do the same thing for loneliness. It would be very easy. That's not a huge obstacle. Getting insurance to pay for it, educating doctors, educating patients to understand why they're being asked these questions, raising awareness. Detection. How do we distinguish loneliness and isolation from other health conditions? Am I lonely because I'm a cancer patient and my medication makes me sick, and so I'm afraid to leave my house because I don't want to be doing, barfing in the grocery store? Or am I lonely for other reasons? So you've got to kind of look at and parse out, and that takes a little bit of time that a lot of doctors don't have, or healthcare workers don't have. There's a lot of stigma associated with admitting that you're lonely because we blame the individual. Instead of saying, hey, you live in a community, you live in a rural community, or you live in a community that doesn't have good transportation options. Instead of saying, hey, there's a lot of factors that go into you being isolated, we blame the individual. Hey, you just must not be very lovable. On the lack of effective solution side, they talk about the fact that we have all these different approaches to solving loneliness, but the stakeholders aren't working together. So we've got to find a way to unify our nonprofits, our federal, state, and local governments, and get everybody connected so that Medicare is working with your city, is working with your county, is working with your AARP, to manage this problem. And then, how do we have, if we have multiple solutions, how do we unify those solutions? How do we connect those solutions? And then they talk about assumptions and assuming that older people need to have the technology dumbed down or customized for them. And as I said, different people are going to be, are going to approach technology as a solution in different ways. I think a lot of times the mistake is made to assume that anyone over 50 can't use technology, but we grew up with technology. So we're now at the point where our older generations have had computers. We didn't have cell phones, but we had computers for quite a long time, for most of our adult working lives. So then we're going to have to figure out, hey, maybe you were a stay-at-home parent, so you didn't have to use a computer. So you need more support. Or, my brother-in-law's worked in construction his whole life, didn't really need to use a computer that much, so he's not very good at tech. So we're going to have to really approach people as individuals rather than assuming that because someone is a certain age that they're not going to be able to use technology as a solution. Okay, so the IBM study starts to talk about solutions. And so how do we detect loneliness earlier and have new research and insights? How do we get people more engaged? I think it's kind of comical that IBM has a typo. They spelled their wrong in their community. I guess they don't use spell check. So create a new kind of community where it's easy for people to get around. There's activities that are available. How do we create social connection later in life? And so some of the suggestions that they came up with is having Uber. They love the concept of self-driving cars, which makes me think that IBM must have a small company that's, Google does, Facebook does, I'm sure IBM does. They're all in on self-driving cars. I like some of the approaches that IBM suggested, that the Stanford Longevity Project has suggested, flexible work schedules. So allowing seniors to work part-time, allowing them to work flexible hours, allowing them to take sabbaticals, but keeping people in the workplace longer will solve a lot of our problems. Making sure that we build communities that are senior-friendly, age-friendly. Stanford talks a lot about post-retirement careers in education. A lot of people that are in school now will easily live to be 100. If you retire at age 60 or 65, you've got 40 years to fill. So you better start thinking about, what am I going to do? Am I going to have a post-retirement career? Am I going to go back to school and maybe learn more about technology? Or, I've started studying foreign languages. That's just a hobby of mine that I hope keeps my brain active. And having this intergenerational living program. So we might have people, for example, I'm seeing houses being built now where you have a mother-in-law quarters with a little kitchenette, so that it would be easier for an older person to come live with a family member. But having that concept of intergenerational living, where you can have a community where some people are older and retired, some people are younger, and keep everybody together rather than isolating the older people. Okay, so the other thing we asked you to look at is this implications of loneliness article. And they talk about the interaction between stress and loneliness, and they talk about what they call buffering measures, ways that protect you from stress. So you've got good ways to protect yourself from stress, bad ways to protect yourself from stress. So the positive ways, the healthy ways to use social connection to deal with stress is relaxation, laughter, breathing, rethinking the situation, redefining the situation. And the negative ways, of course, are pretty obvious. You go out with your friends and you use drugs, you drink too much, you end up missing work because you're hungover, you're smoking with your friends. All of these things can lead to negative outcomes. Okay. The one thing that I thought was really interesting about the article is this idea of perceived social support. If you perceive that you have a high level of social support, that's good for you. You feel better about your stress. I'm not alone. I don't have to go through this alone. When I was diagnosed with cancer 11 years ago, my mom, who I just love that she did this, she's on the phone with me and she said, hey, if you need me, I'm on the next plane out. She lived in New Orleans. I lived out here. So it's 1,500 miles away. She says, you need me, I'm in the next plane out. And that relieved about 95% of my stress in an instant, because I had younger children and I was worried about how they were going to, how my situation was going to impact them. And I knew in the back of my head she couldn't realistically come out because my stepdad was physically disabled and she needed pretty much round the clock care. But the fact that she offered was really nice. So I had that perceived social support. So that was really good. Interestingly, high levels of actual support is bad for stress, possibly because it makes the person feel like they can't do things on their own, that they're not capable. And so be careful when you're offering support, particularly to an older relative, that you say, hey, I'm here if you need me. I'd like to help you with this. I know that you can do this yourself, but I just want to lighten your load. I know you're very capable. I know that you're a really smart, capable person, but don't smother them with too much support. So the thing that they really looked at in this article was, how does this perception of social support impact your health? Lower risk of heart disease, increased oxytocin release, just like I get with my dogs. When I'm having a bad day, there's nothing like sitting down with your dog to release some oxytocin and relieve your stress, and reduced cortisol. So all of those things, as we know now, are going to have profound effects on your body, your immune system, your heart, your brain. Really, really profound effects. Okay, so I wanted to throw in some of the tips that the NIH has come up with, that AARP has come up with, and talk about all the different things you can do to stay connected socially and to help others stay connected socially. So you use your phone, email, social media, schedule time every day to stay in touch. So my husband, John, is amazing at that. He has a group of friends he's been friends with probably since he was 10 years old, and they still stay in touch. They text each other, they call each other, they, say something on Instagram or Facebook. They got together for brunch last week. It's really great to see that brotherhood that has developed. It's really, really amazing. Have a hobby. A lot of times our hobbies lead us to engage with others. Take a class. We've talked, what are we going to do when we retire? Who knows? But I wouldn't mind taking photography classes or taking language classes. Volunteering, I think, is really huge. And we'll talk a little bit about volunteering when we talk about gratitude. Volunteering gives people a sense of purpose. It allows you to stop focusing on yourself and focus on others, and it will release oxytocin, reduce your stress. And I am a huge, huge believer in pets. I believe in pet therapy. When you have a pet, we walk our dogs every day in our neighborhood. We know probably 200 people that we see on a regular basis, and they recognize us because they recognize our dogs. We don't necessarily always know their names, and they don't know our names, but they know that John had shoulder surgery last summer, and they know that I, am a cancer patient, and they know what our dogs are doing, and we stop and chat and talk. So if you have a dog, the world is your oyster. Okay. And then this is from the AARP. This is from a UK website that says, get a pet, teach someone how to do something, use technology, volunteer, join a group. And like we see in Canada, like we saw in Nosara, you make eye contact and you smile at people when you're out and about. So when you're at the grocery store, you smile and make a joke. When you walk down the little Pueblo dirt street in Nosara, Costa Rica, you say Pura Vida to every person that you pass by. ¿Cómo estás? Buenos días. And they respond to you. And we've lost a little bit of that in our bigger cities and more urban environments where social interaction is considered maybe a little bit dangerous. So hopefully you can take all this and use it. Being socially connected is more complicated than we might think, but there are definitely tools that we can use and that we can help our loved ones and our older relatives use to stay socially connected. And now that we know how important it is from a health standpoint, I think we're all going to try. We're all going to try. And again, I can't stress this enough. You can be an introvert like me. John's so extroverted, he never met a stranger. Everywhere he goes, he talks to people, he makes friends. He's Mr. Chatty. I'm an introvert. I'm happy at home. During the pandemic, I was like, hey, this is kind of hard, but I'm at home. My family's here. I got my dog. I'm cool. However, even introverts like me, I stay connected by engaging in purposeful activities. So I have a group of friends I've made through volunteering. I have a group of friends that I've made through my book club. I have my friends that I've made through walking my dog and all the neighbors on my street. So even if you're like me and you're not naturally gifted at going out and making social connections, you can find purposeful things to do that will help you stay active and engaged and socially connected. So I hope that helped. We'll be back next week with 2 more interventions. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns or if you need any help at all. All righty. Have a great day.
Yes, it's your hands to 4 if you want.
And then stop.
Stop.